Tell me something. When did you get clued in? All those years back when you were working for Walter Cronkite.
Yes.
Were you clued in then?
Oh, that I wish I had been. No, I was young, I was naive, I was idealistic, I was so enthralled with the idea that they would tap a 23-year-old on the shoulder and actually listen to my advice. But I was paying attention. I just didn't have the big picture. And I'll give you an example. We had a meeting one evening in the executive producer's office, and it was on a weekend, and there was supposed to be this press conference by astronauts. I think it was during Apollo 8. You know, what you do is you launch from the Cape, you'd spend 3 days going to the moon, you do your thing at the moon, go into orbit, land, whatever, then you would take 3 days coming home. Normally under these missions, the only people that ever got to talk to the astronauts was what was called a CAPCOM, a capsule communicator, basically another astronaut. And NASA set this policy up in the very beginning because you don't want confusion under critical moments of too many voices. So even all the other flight controllers, all the other people at NASA that are running the mission, all funnel their information through one guy who then talks to the crew. The first deviation from that really important and obviously responsible position was this Sunday afternoon when the astronauts were falling home to Earth, you know, nothing to do for 2 or 3 days between Earth and Moon. I mean, just imagine that scene. You're floating in zero G. There's these incredible views out the window, the Earth out one window, the moon receding out the other, and you're basically bored. So what they did is they set up the first press conference in space where members of the press assembled in Houston got a chance to go on mic and actually directly ask the astronaut questions. They had 3 astronauts on the Apollo program. This was unheard of. This was amazing. This was wonderful. This was transparency. So we're looking at our clocks and watches, and we're looking at the monitors, and we've got the links, you know, satellite links to Houston, and we're waiting, in essence, for the spacecraft to rise above the horizon at Goldstone, California, where there's a huge, big dish, 64-foot satellite antenna, basically, that is looking at the spacecraft between Earth and Moon and is going to take the signal and receive and send the actual questions. And of course, for that to happen, it has to be able to see the spacecraft. Well, because it's on a rotating Earth and the geometry of the moon and where the spacecraft is and all that could not be changed, they had to wait for the spacecraft to rise over the horizon in the desert of Goldstone before the press conference could begin. So we're sitting there and we're, you know, talking to each other, and, you know, the executive producer got his feet up on his desk, and there's a bunch of other people sitting on his couches in the office.
And are you at JPL?
No, we're in New York at the CBS News Broadcast Center on West 57th Street. Hooked in electronically.
Okay.
You know, even then, even those dark ages, we had television by satellite, you know, and we were able to see what was going on. We're watching the monitors, we're watching Houston, we're watching the press corps, and we're waiting for the astronauts to appear electronically. They also had a TV camera in the spacecraft. We're all waiting for them in Houston to be able to connect with them via the Goldstone ground station. And the PIO, Public Information Officer, comes on from NASA and says, well, we're waiting for the spacecraft to rise above the horizon, the mountains at Goldstone. So, you know, I'm 23, right? And I'm thinking, that's weird. This doesn't make any sense. So I took out, you know, your typical cliched envelope, and I started scribbling some equations. And, you know, you basically take the radius of the Earth and the way it rotates and the height of the mountains, you know. And I leaned over to my executive producer and I said, psst, Bob, NASA's lying. You know, what? I said, they're lying to us.
Oh my God.
Now this was something so incredibly trivial, like who cared? But I said, if he's telling the truth, the mountains that they're waiting for the spacecraft to rise over have to be 5,000 miles high. They had to be lying. So it turned out later that what they were really doing is waiting for Jules Bergman, who had gotten drunk the previous night, who was the senior correspondent for space for ABC News. He had gotten drunk, he got up late, he didn't make it to the press room in time, and NASA was covering with a technical piece of BS so Jules Bergman, who was their pet correspondent, could get on camera and ask the first question in this historic correspondent asked astronaut in space live without a flight controller or a Capcom in between. That was my first example on the record of when I looked at NASA and realized they were lying, and it was so silly. With that as background, as I got into this whole area of looking at Mars, looking at the moon, looking at the politics, looking at the secret societies, the agendas and all that, that first example where I was not believed, because who was I? I was just a consultant to CBS News. NASA could do no wrong. I mean, Wussler basically said to me, you got to be nuts. There's no way. He accepted, we all did in those days, NASA's word over anybody else having to do with the space program. Well, what Dark Mission is an expose that NASA can't be trusted, because starting with those 5,000-mile high mythical mountains, they have not been for 40 years telling us the truth.